Welcome to eHealth Learning, inspiring professionals worldwide.
So, very warm welcome to everybody, and particularly to Robert Schleip, who's talking to us from Munich today. And Robert is director of the Fascial research project at Ulm University, and is also a Rolfer, has been a Rolfer for many years, and also a Feldenkrais practitioner. So, Robert's going to talk to us about fascial tonicity, and over to you, Robert. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. I'm speaking to you from Munich, Germany, and it's 8 p.m. here. So I know some of you are in Australia, some of you are in the UK, and some of the names I see here on the screen, I know you are living in the United States. So it is my pleasure to put together some information and also some interpretation on my side as a former body worker, I want to say, because in the last few years I have changed over from having practiced as a manual therapist, mostly as a roughing practitioner, but also as a Feldenkrais movement practitioner. And now I spend most of my time with scientists. I still practice manual therapy, but not as much as I used to do before. So this is what I can offer to you. As somebody who knows your field, if you are a manual therapist or movement therapist, I think I know what most of the questions and the observations in this field tend to be, and I will share some information from the field of fascia research in the last few years. And of course, I have some slides prepared. You will get them, so you can look up the detailed information and also the references behind it. And also I look forward to leave some time for questions at the end. So before I get started into the real theme of fascial tonicity, let me recap how the term fascia has now been more clarified based on a committee that was formed at the last Fascia Research Congress that was in Boston about a year ago. And their committee was formed to make some suggestions to the members of the Fascia Research Society, but also to others, which of the many different terms for fascia we suggest to follow. And in brief, and this also has been published very recently in the Journal of Bodywide and Movement Therapy in an article by Carla Stecco and our group, we suggest to have two different terms for fascia. One, a very precise one, in which we suggest to follow not Gray's anatomy, but rather the terminologia anatomica, which is even more precise, based on the background information that we got, that this terminologia anatomica, that is done by the most authoritative anatomy organizations in this world, the organizations on anatomical terminology, and they plan to have a new edition out in a couple of weeks or months by now. And according to them, fascia are only dense, membranous, sheet-like connective tissues that you can cut with a naked eye with a knife. So it means that the soft intramuscular connective tissue, for example, the endomysium inside the muscle, which is so small and so thin that you will have difficulties to cut it without a microscope, is intramuscular connective tissue, but it is not fascia, according to this definition of fascia. However, we also suggest to use a more wide term called the fascial system, or you could call it the fascial net, which embraces the increasing knowledge that many of the fibrous tissues, whether you call them joint capsule, whether you call them endomysium or perimysium, or the epimysium, these are the various envelopes around a single myofibril, about muscle fiber bundles, or about the whole muscle, that they are all interlinked into a body-wide tensional system in which the ligaments are nothing more than local densifications within such a body-wide, collagenous, fibrous, tension transmitting system. So for any discussion that you have with histologists, also if you want to predict what you see in a microscope, and also when you have a brief discussion with anatomy professors and people who have been shaped by anatomy in school medicine, we suggest to avoid any discussions and use the strict definition of aphasia and call the others tendon, joint capsules, etc. However, when you are talking with colleagues who are open to consider the proprioceptive functions, the force transmitting functions, and also the various stiffenings that we are now addressing in this talk, for example, in wound regulation and contracture, these stiffening changes don't differentiate whether you call the tissue on the bottom of your foot plantar fascia, plantar ligament, or plantar aponeurosis, because in this definition, whether it is an aponeurosis with parallel fiber, or whether it is a tendon that has even more parallel fibers, or joint capsule or septum, they are all part of a body-wide tension transmitting system. On the picture on the upper left, which I like very much, that was the European edition of the National Geographic that had a very nice article on fascia recently. This is Professor Carla Stecco, and she is posing here in one of the oldest anatomy teaching rooms that they have at the University of Padua. And University of Padua is where a big portion of musculoskeletal anatomy has been defined. And she is raising her soft voice and saying we need to open the books and add the topography of the fascial system. And if you haven't seen it, if you haven't heard it, she recently published the first ever atlas of the human fascial system that was ever published in 400 years of human anatomy. And that, of course, is a historical contribution. In the past, people thought that this system is more or less a packing organ, but now almost everybody agrees it's not just a packing organ. It has very significant neurological sensory functions on nociception, but also on proprioception and interoception, and it heavily influences the muscular force transmission, among other things.